I never thought a single moment could change the course of my life forever. It was a Thursday afternoon when I walked into my room, only to find it empty. My favorite books, my diary, even the little trinkets I'd collected since childhood, they were all gone. On my bed was a note, scribbled in my mother's handwriting, "You've brought shame. These things are no longer yours." I froze. I couldn't breathe. The words stabbed me harder than any fist ever could. I was 16, scared, and carrying a secret my parents refused to accept. The pregnancy had been an accident, a mistake I wished I could undo. But instead of comfort, I was met with rage. The shame I carried wasn't just mine, it had been shoved back at me like a weapon. I clutched the empty shells and felt my chest tighten. How could the people who were supposed to protect me turn their backs so easily? My mind raced. That night, I lay on the cold floor, crying silently. Somewhere deep inside, a small, stubborn flame ignited, a quiet determination that someday they would regret this. I just didn't know how yet. I left home that night with nothing but a small bag and a pounding heart. The streets were cold, the neon lights flickering as if mocking my pain. I didn't know where to go, and I didn't care. I just needed distance, a breath of air that wasn't laced with judgment or anger. People passed by, oblivious to the storm inside me. The first months were brutal. I slept in cramped apartments, worked at diners that smelled of grease and despair, and learned quickly how cruel the world could be. But I was tougher than I looked. Every insult, every shove from life only fueled me more. My son, Lucas, became my anchor. I had to survive, not for me, but for him. I became observant, strategic. I learned which people could be trusted, who would betray you for a few dollars or an easy favor. Every day was a chess move, and I had no choice but to play perfectly. Then one afternoon, a familiar face appeared at the diner, a man who looked too familiar, carrying a folder with my name on it. My heart skipped. Could it be them? Or was this another trick of fate? I ducked behind the counter, pretending to mop the floor, my hands trembling. The man scanned the room, and then, as if satisfied, walked out. I exhaled slowly, realizing that fear had a way of sharpening instincts I never knew I had. I couldn't let anyone know who I really was, not yet. The world had taught me that lesson fast. Over the next few years, I worked tirelessly, clawing my way from dead-end jobs to a small business of my own. Lucas grew strong, clever, and kind, unaware of the battles I fought behind the closed doors. I never told him about the shame, about the parents who had abandoned us. Some scars were mine to carry, and I chose to turn mine into armor. At night, I plotted quietly. I studied people, observed behaviors, learned to manipulate situations without anyone realizing. Revenge wasn't just a word, it was an art form. I promised myself that the day would come when they would look for me, and I would decide if I showed mercy or not. But I wasn't ready yet. Not until every piece of my life was strong enough to withstand their eyes, their lies, their guilt. The fire inside me simmered, patient, waiting for the perfect moment. The day they finally called was ordinary, but my heart skipped a beat as soon as I heard my mother's voice. It had been years. Her tone was different, hesitant, almost pleading. "Becky, we need to see you." I paused, pretending to be busy at the office. Every instinct screamed at me to hang up, to ignore them. But curiosity, a dangerous mix of satisfaction and anger, drew me in. I agreed to meet, setting conditions that only I would understand. I had done my homework, tracking them silently, noting their patterns, their weaknesses. I would walk in as the woman I had become, not the scared, abandoned girl they remembered. When I saw them at the cafe, their eyes widened in shock. They didn't recognize me at first. Lucas by my side, confident, almost defiant, only made it worse. My mother tried to smile, but it faltered. My father's usual arrogance seemed strained, forced. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch, enjoying the tension that hung like a thick fog. Then I spoke, softly, deliberately. "You're looking for me now, but I'm not the same girl you threw out." Their faces went pale. My words sank in slowly, like a stone thrown into still water. I watched as panic replaced pride, and for the first time, they were powerless. I could see the fear. They knew that years of neglect had created a woman who was untouchable. "I've built a life," I continued, my voice calm but sharp. "One that doesn't need your approval, your forgiveness, or your money. Lucas and I are thriving. And now that you've come looking, I get to decide what happens next. They tried to argue, tried to manipulate, but I had anticipated every move. Every lie they had fed themselves, every rationalization for their cruelty, I knew it all. My mind raced, plotting a path to ensure they would remember this encounter forever. As I stood to leave, I whispered, almost casually, "You wanted to see me. Now you will see the consequences of your choices." The shock on their faces was priceless. I walked out, leaving them frozen, realizing for the first time what it meant to truly lose control. I returned to my office, the adrenaline still humming in my veins. Every detail of that meeting played in my mind like a replay. My parents' faces, the shock, the fear. It was intoxicating. Years of planning, of quietly building power, had finally given me leverage. But this was just the beginning. The chessboard was set, and I was only starting to make my moves. Lucas looked up from his homework, oblivious to the tension. His innocence was my anchor, my reminder of why I had endured the years of pain. But even he would one day understand the satisfaction of standing firm against those who had tried to break us. Later that evening, I received a message from my mother. "Please, Becky, don't shut the door completely. We're sorry. We need to explain." My lips curled into a smile, slow, deliberate. I didn't need explanations. I needed justice, and I was in control. I drafted my response carefully, letting them feel just enough hope to make their eventual fall more devastating. "We can meet, but only on my terms. And you will follow every rule I set." They didn't hesitate to agree, proving that desperation makes people vulnerable. As I set the time and place, a wicked thought crossed my mind. The longer I wait, the sweeter it will be when they realize the cost of their cruelty. The day of the meeting arrived, and I felt an odd mixture of excitement and calm. I had rehearsed every word, every gesture, every subtle sign of power. When I entered the cafe, my parents were already there, trembling slightly. My father's tie was crooked, my mother's hands fidgeted. Tiny tells of weakness, I noticed immediately. I walked past them with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, seating myself across from the pair. Lucas sat beside me, quietly confident, his small presence amplifying the tension. They tried to speak first, fumbling for words that never came. I leaned forward, letting silence stretch like a blade. "You wanted to see me. Now you will see me, fully." My words cut deeper than any shout could. They tried to regain control, suggesting small gifts, apologies, and excuses, but I waved them off. This wasn't about words. It was about recognition, about power, about understanding the gravity of their past mistakes. And then, as if on cue, I revealed a small detail they never expected. A new business partnership I had quietly secured, one that would make them regret underestimating me. Their eyes widened. Fear had finally found a home in them. I had learned early that patience was more powerful than anger. I let my parents stew in their uncertainty for weeks, calling occasionally, offering subtle hints that I was thriving. Every call, every message was carefully crafted to build anticipation, to make them doubt themselves. They became addicted to my updates, craving a connection they had long abandoned. They were desperate, vulnerable, and foolishly trusting. I smiled quietly, knowing the trap was set. Revenge isn't just about punishment, it's about watching those who wronged you stumble in the chaos they helped create. One evening, my father suggested a meeting at their home, trying to regain some semblance of control. I agreed, but I made sure the setting was my choosing. Every detail of their house, every object they treasured, I had recorded and studied, preparing subtle surprises that would remind them of the past. The night arrived, and I drove there with Lucas beside me. I could see the tension in their car as we approached. My mind raced with possibilities, each more satisfying than the last. When the door opened, and they saw me, fully composed and confident, the hesitation in their eyes told me I had them exactly where I wanted. Inside their home, I walked deliberately, noticing the dust on the shelves, the faded photographs, and the careless way they had lived without consequences. I felt a surge of triumph. Every detail reminded me of what I had endured, of the nights spent crying, the moments of shame, and the determination to rise. I spoke softly, almost kindly. "Do you remember the day you threw away everything that mattered to me? Every memory, every belonging? I remember it vividly." My mother's face paled, My father's jaw tightened. They had an expected confrontation, so calmly executed. Then I revealed my plan. A small, silent takeover of a business they had once scoffed at, one they thought I would never touch. Slowly, deliberately, I described how I had positioned myself to thrive financially and socially, leaving them powerless to intervene. They tried to interject, tried to manipulate, but I held up a hand. No. Listen. Learn. Understand. And remember this moment. Lucas squeezed my hand, his innocence juxtaposing the darkness of the revenge I wielded so expertly. For the first time, they were truly afraid, not of me as a child, not of my mistakes, but of the woman I had become. I left their house that night with a sense of exhilaration. They were rattled, shaken, unsure of how to proceed. Every step I took reinforced that control, that power, that the years of pain had culminated in this very moment. Yet, I knew better than to let satisfaction breed recklessness. The real impact would come slowly, methodically, as they realized the full extent of what they had lost. I had transformed the hurt into strategy, the shame into leverage, and the past into ammunition. Back at home, I poured a glass of wine and watched Lucas play quietly. My heart swelled with pride, not for revenge, but for the life we had built, independent of those who had abandoned us. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I allowed myself a small, wicked smile. The game was far from over, and the next move would leave them questioning everything. Weeks passed, and my parents became restless, their calls more frantic, their messages more desperate. I answered selectively, letting their anxiety grow with each passing day. It was addictive, watching the people who had once held power over me squirm. I had learned that fear, carefully cultivated, is more powerful than anger. One evening, my mother showed up at my office unannounced. She looked fragile, almost pleading. "Becky, please, let us make amends. We've changed." I studied her carefully, noting every micro-expression, every tremor in her voice. Was it guilt? Or just another manipulation attempt? I smiled faintly, masking the storm inside me. Amends are complicated. Actions speak louder than words. I leaned back, sipping my coffee slowly, letting the silence drag. Her eyes darted around, as if searching for clues of what I might do next. Then, I dropped a subtle but powerful revelation. I had learned of a financial mistake they had made years ago, one that could ruin them if exposed. Their faces went pale. Panic crept in, slowly, beautifully, as they realized they were no longer in control. I didn't give them solutions. I didn't need to. That knowledge alone was enough to make them realize that I had grown, adapted, and become untouchable. I began visiting old contacts I had made during the years I was alone, building connections and quietly consolidating my influence. I had become a force my parents could no longer ignore. Every alliance, every partnership was another tool in my arsenal. Lucas watched with quiet admiration, unaware of the full scope of my plan. Then came the night I intercepted a call between them. They were plotting. Desperation had turned into scheming, and they wanted to regain control. I listened, silently recording every word, every lie, every manipulation. It was poetic justice. When I confronted them the next day, I didn't yell or scream. I simply laid out the evidence, piece by piece. Their attempts to deflect fell flat. "You really think you can intimidate me now? You taught me too well," I whispered, watching their shame deepen. Lucas squeezed my hand, a silent reminder that our bond and survival were more important than petty emotions. But inside, I savored the slow, deliberate unraveling of the people who had once abandoned us. By the end of that day, I knew my revenge had entered its most satisfying phase, the part where control shifted completely into my hands. Months passed, and I continued to manipulate the situation carefully. My parents grew reckless, trying to insert themselves into my life in ways I never allowed. They sent gifts, letters, and even small favors, but I treated each one as a test, a way to measure their desperation. One evening, I received a letter postmarked from their town, a direct challenge. My heart raced, not with fear, but with excitement. They wanted a meeting, no rules, no boundaries. I knew this was the moment to strike strategically, to demonstrate how far I had come. When we met at a neutral location, I brought Lucas, fully aware that their reactions would be priceless. Their eyes widened at how composed and powerful I had become. They stammered apologies and explanations, but it was too late. The narrative had shifted. I revealed an opportunity they could have taken to help us years ago, showing how their neglect had cost them everything. Their faces twisted with disbelief and frustration. I didn't need to say more. My presence, my success, my calm assured them that their cruelty had created their own downfall. For the first time, I felt a complete, intoxicating sense of power. The girl who had been thrown out was gone. This woman was unstoppable. They tried one last gambit: threats, manipulation, even a subtle attempt to pit me against Lucas. I had anticipated it all. I had prepared responses, scenarios, and contingencies. I met every move with calm, deliberate confidence. My silence alone became more threatening than any words they could muster. I reminded them gently, almost kindly, of every betrayal, every cold word, every act of abandonment. Their faces fell, realizing that I had not only remembered but learned from each mistake. Each memory I shared cut deeper than any confrontation. They were being forced to see their own cruelty in living color. Lucas, oblivious to the intensity of the moment, played quietly beside me. Yet his mere presence amplified my strength. I was no longer alone in the world. The people who had once dictated my life had no leverage now. And then I dropped the final truth, one that would make them reconsider ever crossing me again. A financial and legal move I had set in motion quietly over the months. Their wealth, their reputation, their comfort, all hanging by threads they hadn't even noticed. The silence that followed was deafening. They were finally powerless, and I had orchestrated it perfectly. Walking away from that meeting, I felt an unprecedented sense of closure. Years of fear, shame, and abandonment had been transformed into strategy, patience, and ultimate power. My parents had finally understood that their actions created the very consequences they feared. I returned home with Lucas, my mind already plotting the next steps, not for revenge, but to protect what was ours. Every lesson I had learned in those brutal early years became armor, allowing me to build an unshakable life. And yet, even as satisfaction swelled, I reminded myself that mercy could be more powerful than cruelty. I left them shaken but alive, letting them grapple with guilt, regret, and the reality of their own mistakes. That night, as Lucas slept peacefully, I reflected on how far we had come. The girl who was abandoned, shamed, and discarded had grown into a woman admired for her resilience, intelligence, and courage. Some doors were closed forever, but this one, the door to control, to power, to justice, was mine. And I would guard it fiercely, knowing that sometimes survival alone is the sweetest revenge of all. I didn't hear from them for weeks after the last confrontation. That silence was more satisfying than any argument. They were reeling, unsure how to regain control. I used the time to strengthen our life, investing in business ventures and securing Lucas's future. The fire inside me had become steady, strategic. One evening, an unexpected message appeared. "We need to talk. Urgent. Please come alone." My heart raced, not with fear, but with curiosity. I knew this could be a trap. I spent hours planning, ensuring I had every safeguard in place. This wasn't just about seeing them. I needed proof that they were still manipulators at heart. The meeting location was abandoned, dimly lit, the perfect stage for revelation. As I arrived, my parents' expressions betrayed both relief and panic. They tried small talk, apology, and guilt, all of which I ignored. My eyes scanned for any sign of deceit. Then, I noticed something unsettling, a document in my father's hand, one I hadn't authorized them to have. A shiver ran down my spine. Had they plotted something beyond my anticipation? Or was this another piece of their unraveling? I leaned in and asked calmly, "What is that?" Their hesitation spoke volumes. I had waited years to confront them, but now, the real game was about to begin. The folder contained contracts, bank statements, and correspondence I had never seen. My father stammered, It's complicated. We just wanted to show we've changed." I studied each page carefully. Something wasn't right. My instincts, honed over years of struggle, screamed at me they were hiding something. I decided to probe slowly, letting their answers reveal their weaknesses. Every lie they told was transparent. every hesitation, a confirmation of my suspicion. They thought they could regain leverage, but I had become far too skilled for that. Lucas sat beside me quietly, and I felt his presence steady me. I realized that my careful patience had prepared me for this exact moment, where I could catch them in their own web of deceit. Then, I uncovered it, a hidden clause in one of their business documents that could ruin them if leveraged properly. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with vindication. Years of planning, observation, and strategy had led to this perfect opportunity. I smiled faintly, knowing that I now had complete control. They were finally on my terms, and their desperation was deliciously evident. I let them stew in anxiety for days, sending subtle hints that I had discovered the document. Panic radiated through their calls, their messages, their half-hearted attempts at apologies. They were trapped in a psychological labyrinth of their own making. Then I decided to escalate. I sent them a formal notice, outlining their mistakes, their negligence, and the potential consequences of their inaction. The letter was precise, cold, and professional, an undeniable display of my power. I watched from a distance as their world began to wobble. Their social circle, their finances, their pride, all threatened by the revelation I had meticulously orchestrated. They were finally paying for years of emotional cruelty. The best part? I didn't have to lift a finger to physically harm them. Watching them squirm, powerless, was the ultimate revenge. Their addiction to control had been their downfall, and I was the mastermind who had exploited it perfectly. Lucas looked up at me one evening, smiling innocently. "Mom, you're amazing." My chest swelled, not for revenge, but for the woman I had become, and the life we had built, independent of those who once discarded us. The final confrontation was inevitable. I agreed to meet them one last time, this time in a neutral office I had rented, a space designed for observation and control. They arrived, tense, hesitant, and completely unaware of the full extent of my strategy. I walked in calmly, Lucas beside me, and laid everything on the table, the hidden document, the past grievances, the strategic moves that had put them at my mercy. Their faces went pale. Every attempt at rationalization, every attempt at persuasion, crumbled. Then came the twist. They tried one last manipulation, claiming they had changed and wanted to rebuild our relationship. I smiled, amused. Change isn't proven by words. Change is proven by actions, and their actions had nearly destroyed me. I handed them copies of every document, every proof, letting them see clearly how powerless they were. Their world had shrunk to the size of their mistakes, and they finally understood that I wasn't the scared girl they once abandoned. For the first time, I saw true regret. Not fleeting guilt, but the heavy, suffocating realization that years of neglect had irreversibly altered their lives. As I left that office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The storm of emotions, fear, shame, anger, had been channeled into precision and patience. My parents had learned, the hard way, that actions have consequences. Back home, Lucas and I celebrated quietly. The victory wasn't just for revenge, it was for resilience, intelligence, and survival. I had transformed pain into power, humiliation into strategy, and abandonment into mastery. That night, I reflected on how far we had come. I wasn't just the girl who had been thrown out. I was the woman who had reclaimed her life and built a fortress that no one could breach. I knew there would always be echoes of the past, shadows of those who had hurt me, but for the first time, I was untouchable. And Lucas, growing strong and proud, would never face the same cruelty. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to feel unshakable peace. My parents' search for me had ended, but the legacy they left behind would always remind them of who had truly won. Weeks later, my parents attempted one final approach, sending a private investigator to learn more about me. I knew immediately their desperation had reached a fever pitch. But this time, I didn't panic. Instead, I turned it into a demonstration of control. I let the investigator follow me, but I guided every step, carefully leaving clues that highlighted my strength, my success, and the life I had built. Lucas thrived in his schoolwork, our home warm and orderly, a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. When the report reached them, it was laced with admiration and fear. They realized that their attempts to reclaim power only reinforced my dominance. I hadn't just survived, I had orchestrated every outcome, making them fully aware that their actions had consequences they couldn't undo. I allowed myself a small smile. The girl who had been discarded years ago had become the architect of her own destiny. They had underestimated me, but I had been planning this quietly, watching, waiting, and preparing for this exact moment. By the time they reached out again, I was untouchable. Every move they made was predictable, every plea calculable. And I had learned the ultimate lesson. Power lies in patience, in strategy, and in understanding human nature better than anyone else. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. An old friend from my teenage years reached out, someone who had witnessed part of my darkest moments. They offered me information about the lengths my parents had gone to cover their shame, including threats to people who had tried to help me. I felt a pang of fury but controlled it. I realized the story wasn't just mine to tell. It was proof of their recklessness, a demonstration of what they had become. I compiled the evidence, careful to protect Lucas and myself, while simultaneously preparing the next phase of confrontation. When I revealed these findings to my parents, they froze. The arrogance they had carried for years crumbled instantly. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I simply laid the facts bare, letting their guilt and fear fill the room. I could see it in their eyes, the realization that the consequences of their cruelty extended far beyond what they had imagined. And in that moment, I understood the full power of patience, planning, and self-preservation. For the first time, I felt entirely untouchable. The mastermind they had ignored had risen. I decided it was time to set the final terms. I invited them to a neutral location, not to reconcile, but to witness the life I had built, the success, the stability, the happiness. Lucas, ever bright and confident, accompanied me. Their shock upon seeing our home, our accomplishments, was palpable. I spoke softly, clearly and deliberately. You sought me for forgiveness, for explanations. What you see now is what your neglect created. Every word landed with precision. Every glance, every gesture emphasized control. They attempted apologies, manipulation, and excuses, but it was futile. I had anticipated every tactic. Their desperation was an art form, one I had studied patiently for years. Then I revealed the final twist. I had documented everything, their neglect, their lies, their attempts to regain control, and shared it with people in their social and professional circles. Their reputation, carefully built over decades, now rested in the balance, fully exposed. The realization hit them like a storm. They were powerless. For the first time, they understood that their cruelty had consequences that extended far beyond our family. And I, the girl they had discarded, had orchestrated it flawlessly. As I left that meeting, I felt a serene sense of closure unlike anything I had experienced before. The years of shame, anger, and pain had been transformed into strategy, patience, and ultimate triumph. Lucas ran ahead, laughing, free from the shadows of a past that had tried to define him. I watched him, feeling pride swell, not for revenge, but for resilience, intelligence, and courage. I realized then that true power wasn't just in punishing those who had wronged me, it was in creating a life they could never touch, a legacy they could never undo. Every calculated move, every quiet strategy, had led to this moment. My parents would remember me, not as the frightened girl they had abandoned, but as the woman who had risen above their cruelty, who had claimed control over her life, and who had ensured that justice, subtle yet undeniable, was finally served. Years later, when my parents attempted to reach out again, it was too late. I had moved forward, building a life filled with love, stability, and success. Lucas thrived, unburdened by the past, and I finally allowed myself to feel peace. I looked back only briefly, reflecting on the journey from fear to power. Every moment of suffering had forged the woman I had become. The girl who was discarded was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded respect, who demanded fairness, and who understood that patience and intelligence were stronger than anger alone. As I held Lucas in my arms, I whispered quietly, "We won. We always will." And for the first time, I truly believed it. The past had shaped us, but it did not define us. I had transformed pain into power, rejection into strategy, and shame into mastery. And the people who once looked down on me would never forget the woman I had become.